Good morning, everyone. I'm Constance Armstrong. I'm Executive Director of the Boston Club, and it's a great pleasure to have you all with us here this morning, especially those of you who are guests and attending one of our events for the first time. We are very happy to be presenting yet another program in the series organized by our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. And the amount of work that they've done pulling this together and the panel they put together is a joy for us all. And I know you're going to like it too. So to get the program started, I would first like to ask you to put any questions you may have in the chat. This is being conducted as a webinar, so you will not be interactive and able to speak to the panelists, but we are looking for your questions. So you can put them in the chat or in the Q&A, and it will be monitored and your questions will be addressed. In addition, you can chat to other attendees and the panelists while you're in chat. With that, I will turn it over to Donna Bonaparte, who is chair of the Boston Club's DEIC committee and a member of our board. Donna.
Excuse me. Thank you, Constance. Good morning. So good to have so many of you join us here today. On behalf of the DE&I committee, we welcome you to our program. This committee of hardworking, dedicated professionals works to present timely programs that support our members as they further their knowledge and competence in diversity, equity, and inclusion. Today's program is designed to enlighten you, to inspire you, and probably motivate you. Because we know that many of us have become increasingly aware of the systemic inequities that prevail within our society. These discrepancies in allocation of and access to resources is having an adverse impact on specific populations, including persons of color. One area where this is very prominent is in our educational system. We recognize that historically, education has provided access and opportunity for those who are adversely impacted. So with the decrease of this foundation comes a corresponding reduction in options, including career pursuits. So in today's interactive forum, you'll hear from Superintendent Brenda Casalias, who's leading the state's largest district, the Boston Public Schools, and Joe Rosenbaum of the United Way. And they're going to talk about the importance of education, particularly in STEM, and about exemplary partnerships which create opportunities for our students. We'll also hear from two young women of color who are going to share the critical moments in their lives where they gain the confidence to persevere their dreams. And we know dreaming it is the first step in achieving it. So now it's my pleasure to introduce our speakers. Brenda Casalias has been an educator for more than 3 decades and has devoted her career to ensuring all children succeed and thrive. As superintendent of the Boston Public Schools since July of 2019, Dr. Casalias works to ensure every child receives an equitable, exceptional, and joyful education. Her leadership is student-centered, supportive of educators, and grounded in collaboration and effective community partnerships. Before joining Boston as a superintendent, Dr. Casalias was the Commissioner of Education for the state of Minnesota for over 8 years. Prior to that role, Dr. Casalias served as the superintendent of East Metro Integration District in Minnesota, as associate superintendent in the Minnesota Public School District, and was leading a comprehensive high school redesign initiative, and acted as the superintendent of middle schools in Memphis, Tennessee. Joe Rosenbaum is the director of the United Way-led BOSSTEM initiative. He focuses on narrowing the STEM learning equity gap in the greater Boston area by uniting stakeholders to provide career-inspiring opportunities for our students and the social capacity to support our students. He's earned his master's degree in macro social work from Boston College and has experiences related to research, mental illness, education, and workforce development. Christina Silva is a research associate at the organization Turk. She previously attended Wheelock College and Simmons University as she gained her background in social work, youth justice, and advocacy. She's a former Turk scholar and has previously interned at institutions including Boston Children's Hospital, and the Asian Task Force Against Domestic Violence in Boston. She's passionate about social justice and integrating it into the research she conducts at TURT, which is based on experiences lived for people of color in STEM and their professions. And last but certainly not least, Ying Ying Wu grew up in Guangdong, China before moving to Boston with her family 11 years ago. She's earned a bachelor's degree in mathematics teaching from Wheelock College and a master's degree in mathematics teaching from Boston University, and was a Noyes Scholar with a full scholarship. She completed her student teaching in the Boston Public Schools and is currently an 8th grade math teacher in the Lowell Public School District. In fact, we had to wait just a few minutes until she conducted attendance. As an immigrant, she stands with the tremendous challenge and understands what it means to learn math in a foreign language. It's been the foundation of her quest to help students, particularly those where English is not their first language. And now for today's program, I'd like to introduce our co-host and facilitator, Lori Sherman.
Good morning. It is fabulous to be with all of you this morning with this special panel and with you, the audience. And there are, as Constance said, in case you're popping in now, 2 ways for you to engage with us and with each other. If you go to the bottom of your screen and click to open the chat, that's a place where you can post resources to each other, comments, ideas. And if you go to the bottom of your screen and go to the left of the chat, you'll see the Q&A. If you put questions in there, they'll go directly to me, and we will do our best to answer them throughout the program. So as we bring on the superintendent, and all of our panelists have asked us to call them by their first name. So as we bring on the superintendent, Brenda, I want to say something in a personal note quickly, why I'm so honored to have you here, Brenda. I am the mother of 3 Boston Public School students who are now in college and graduate school and attended BPS. So we saw firsthand the challenges, the opportunities, the strengths from inside the school system. It was really an amazing education for my kids. And while I'm an executive coach now, years ago, I served as a policy advisor to the late Boston Mayor Tom Menino on issues that cut across education, health, and human services. And I developed a deep regard for the complexity of what urban public school system superintendents deal with here and around the country. It's got to be one of the hardest jobs there is. And it is really the true social justice work of our lifetimes. And for you to come on board in 2020, right before the pandemic hit, I just can't imagine. So we are looking forward to hearing your experiences and your wisdoms, and specifically how we as the business community can engage with the schools. Over to you, Superintendent Casalias.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Laura and Donna. Can you hear me? You can. Okay, good. Just make sure I'm off of mute. That happens at least 2 or 3 times a day where somebody has to be told you're on mute. Thank you, Laura and Donna, and good morning, everyone. Thank you all for being here, and thanks for what you do every day for our students. I know some of you are Boston Public School parents, and so I want to thank you, especially this past year, which has been an incredibly hard year for all of us, probably the most difficult year of my career. This pandemic has really put us to the side a little bit, I would say. And it's been our families who have pulled us through, and all of our partners who have stepped up to make a difference for us and bridge the gap for our students while we were in remote learning and back again, and then back in remote learning, and then now full-time 5 days a week for our K-8, and soon next week to be for our high school students. So really excited to turn this corner now, as our positivity rate is 2.6 in Boston, with every neighborhood below 4%. I can't tell you how those words land with me now as we begin to turn towards summer school and really putting together a strong summer school program of recovery and boosting up our children, and some of the opportunities, the STEM opportunities that we'll have there, and just how important this conversation is to our future, our environment, our world, and making sure that students have everything that they need to be successful in this ever-changing climate that we live in, and the problems that are going to need to be solved that we don't even realize are going to be needing to be solved. So as we think about preparing our students and the importance of science education, I can't think of a more important discipline for students to learn as they go through their elementary through middle and high school careers here with us, and then on to college and career. So thank all of you very, very much for what you do to bridge that gap and to support us. I know many of you are professionals in the STEM field and contribute to our knowledge every day and to our teachers' knowledge. So again, just many thanks. Most recently, during our spring recess in April, I had the pleasure of speaking to an amazing group of BPS students who voluntarily participated in the Bridge to Calculus program at Northeastern University during their vacation. The program comprised mostly of BPS students of color from disadvantaged backgrounds, coupled with, amazing BPS educators and their mentors. Is an advanced math-focused initiative that prepares our students for careers in engineering, science, mathematics, and the arts. Many of you have heard not only of STEM, but adding the A in there for the arts, because arts and math and science are really closely linked within the brain. And one of my biggest takeaways from this program is that if cultivated early in the lives of our students, STEM can become a really great passion in their studies. A STEM focus can ultimately change the course of their educational and professional paths forever. I know I was very interested in STEM. I remember in Head Start when the teacher took a piece of celery, put it in colored water. How many of you remember that experiment when you were little? And the celery changed color. And so learning really early on, the properties of how celery and plants absorb water into their cells was just an incredible turn on for me as a young child. And so those early foundations make a huge, big difference to children's love of learning and love of science. Science, math, and technical education has proven to be a huge equalizer in our society. STEM careers are predicted to soon represent the largest growth spurt of jobs on the employment market by 2029. Students who pursue the math and science fields are almost guaranteed to start a job at $40 an hour upon graduation, and the median average salary for a STEM employee is almost $90,000 a year. It's clear that science and math education can be a tool for success for our students. And although Boston Public Schools is a huge proponent of STEM and STEAM education, access to science here in Boston Public Schools is not access for everybody. Currently, not every student in grades K-8 is receiving science instruction daily, but we're working hard to change that. But this disparity that was fueled by the opportunity gap of our students to pursue advanced STEM programs and pathways within BPS and outside through internships and programming, like the Bridge to Calculus program at Northeastern University, demonstrates that we can bridge those gaps. And we're grateful for the incredible partnerships that we have throughout the city of Boston that also help us, and so many other partnerships with nonprofits, with our business community that really help us to get rid of those barriers for the long term so that students will have success and be able to have a greater opportunity. Boston Public Schools is going to continue to provide a joyful, accessible, and equitable STEM and STEAM opportunities for all of our students to become agents of their learning and prepare them to be culturally agile and adapt to the ever-changing world around them. This is why we have worked with GE to initiate the Building Excellence Educators of Science. We call it the BEES Initiative, with the generous support of General Electric. This program is helping us to close the science opportunity gap for students in Boston Public Schools by building educator capacity to ensure students are receiving science daily, and working with schools to create scheduling that is equitable for all learners. This occurs by bridging science instruction into the classrooms in addition to science specials. Specials is the word we have for special classes that they have outside of their regular classroom teacher. The Bees initiative brings in science instructional coaches to support implementation, planning, and coaching, and it assures all students receive an equitable and culturally linguistic sustaining opportunity and curriculum that's relevant to their science education. We've taken a sharp focus on science, especially in the early grades, because an introduction to science at a young age can be life-altering, and we're counting on it. We're also working with some amazing teachers. When I was on my 100-day tour to visit all our schools, which I did do, I visited a science classroom at the East Boston Early Learning Center. It was incredibly memorable. This was Miss Carroll's classroom. It was an early childhood classroom that was so beautiful, joyful, and thoughtfully appointed, which tapped into the child's creativity, their problem solving, and their cooperative inquiry learning. She was a true champion for science. I got a text from her just the other day as she continues to inspire other science teachers by sharing her practice and her love of teaching. Boston Public Schools is providing professional development for teachers that is aimed at building their content expertise, their skills, and experiences that are connected to the growing STEM industry. Just recently, Boston Green Academy got a freight farm, which was an amazing opportunity to be able to do gardening right outside because they didn't have science labs in their school building. So introducing wonderful opportunities like that to our teachers allows them then to share their practice and to work with one another to create a more equitable access to safe educational spaces where children can learn, where they can tell their stories, where they can share their identities and their culture. Teachers co-plan together to facilitate high quality STEM and STEAM instruction. And then that allows students to apply the Massachusetts content standards through design thinking and through creativity and inquiry. They understand the role of this that STEAM plays in today's society and how it relates to the core subject areas by participating in ongoing and consistent professional learning together. Teachers learn best from teachers is what I always say. So we're intentionally building educator capacity around the foundations of science, technology, engineering, and mathematics to improve their ability to provide high quality, which is integrated instruction that prepares all students to perceive advanced STEM pathways in not only the early grades, which we're really doing a push now, but also in middle and high school. And this, we think, will prepare them strongly for partnerships at the college level in their post-secondary experiences. The Bees initiative also provides classroom teachers with strong professional development to strengthen their science content and their pedagogy through asynchronous content courses, meaning not always live. We've been able to videotape teachers, and they can get this also with asynchronous methods. And we are partnering with Tufts on this initiative. We're also partnering to have summer externships to learn more about professions in the field and operate on multidisciplinary units. They're strengthening their science learning along with their students. The Bees initiative is also strengthening teacher understanding of how writing can support the understanding of science by offering systemic functional linguistics training this summer. Using writing as a vehicle for demonstrating skill and content understanding, teachers are able to provide students with interdisciplinary experiences and critical thinking skills that help them prepare for college and career. And I always say there's nothing better to prepare you for college than teaching a student how to read a lot of material at one time, and then to be able to write about it and make a persuasive argument. Those are the pieces I think that make for a good preparatory foundation for college. Bees also works with teachers and gives them the opportunity to participate in biweekly teacher echo sessions. That's sessions with coaches and central office staff and higher ed partners. They create a learning community that addresses the challenges that they face in their classrooms to help them improve their learning experiences for their students and ensure that content is relevant and meets the needs of the child where they're at. We've been so fortunate in Boston Public Schools to have so many partners, and the STEM department has worked to complete a STEM program inventory with the portfolio of partners to determine how to make STEM programs across Boston Public Schools more equitable. From this inventory, they've been able to identify gaps that are needed to be addressed, such as clear communication of program across all schools, communication definition of STEM and STEAM within our schools, the purpose and need of STEM and STEAM programming to be communicated to school leaders. And then this year, with input from partners, the STEAM working group has been able to provide a consistent definition of STEM and STEAM, which is foundational to understanding then what course taking needs to happen so that all students have the opportunity. They also developed a K-12 roadmap of STEM skills that are required to prepare students for advanced courses. And so these pathways are very, very important to ensure students have the level of rigor from the early grades through on, so that they'll be able to be successful in these courses, and then also be successful in future STEM professions. Once these have been shared with teachers and principals together with support from our partners, then that will help to provide a greater coherence across the district and greater access to our students. And the STEM department is currently working with both STEM on their advisory council to help develop plans on how to increase STEM programming in our schools and bridge the STEM learning gaps that we see among teachers. So that gets me then to our teacher pipeline. This is really important. Because there's always been a shortage of teachers who have the background in STEM, and we want to make sure that they feel successful in their classrooms. So our team has been doing a lot to supplement our STEM pipeline programs, and they have been working with our recruitment cultivation division in order to recruit and retain more educators who reflect the demographics of our students. The percentage of STEM educators of color in Boston Public students is not reflective currently of our diverse student population, and it's an area of growth that we want to put some attention on. There's a growing demand for degreed science, technology, engineering, and mathematics professionals, and few students of color and really few females have chosen STEM as a field of study or work to complete STEM degrees and programs in education. So we want to aim to create a more racially diverse STEM workforce within the Boston Public Schools community, and help with getting more students to take degrees in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics so that they can grow up. So I always say our next Boston Public School teacher is sitting in a Boston Public School classroom right now. So our recruitment and cultivation office has been working with our STEM educators to have cadet programs for students so that they could really early on, starting in 7th grade, think about becoming a teacher in Boston Public Schools. And that is going to help us to diversify our workforce here and our educators. And as we collaborate with the Office of Retention and Cultivation in their teacher cadet program, this is just going to solidify the pathways for students of color to eventual careers right here in Boston Public Schools. Also, as I mentioned earlier in my comments, our families have just been incredible to us this past year, and we have found new ways to engage with our families and to provide access to them so that families have what they need to be successful, from science kits going home to some of our families to new tools for like talking, I think it's called talking points, to be able to interact through text with families who speak a language other than English. And then also the ways that we're working with them to help them get connected to resources and support systems, especially during this past year, has been vital. And so the STEM group has done a few things around science with the kits, and also hosting town halls for some of our families, and making sure that they have availability to the programming that is available for their students and connecting them to all of that work. They've had some town halls already, but later this spring, they will have another town hall to include a listening session with families and students about science fair. The science fair has historically not been as racially diverse as we would like it to be. And so they're looking to increase the racial diversity at our science fair as well. It's been a bit different to host a science fair remotely and to have not be in person questioning students. So just the ingenuity of our science team to still put on events for our kids has been great. And so many of you have partnered with us in the past on science fair, and we just can't be more thankful to you for that as well, as you've served as judges and mentors and supporters of our students. And then I'd like to just speak about a few more things. One is the STEAM Academy for Change. It's a summer program, 5 weeks for students entering grades 3 through 6. And this program aims to provide students the skills required to think and act like STEAM professionals and answer the essential question, how do I solve issues faced by my community using STEAM? And so students complete a daily hands-on activity. They're centered around professional Black and Latinx students who are most underrepresented in. They also will reinforce math and English and language arts skills at each specific grade level and ensure that the students have the skills and content required to do their tasks for the summer programming. So as I wrap up my remarks, I leave you with this one ask, because I think it'll take an all hands on deck approach to see more students pursue STEM programs and careers. But we're going to continue to need your help. I know there's a lot you're already doing, but I'm asking if you can think about ways in which to invest your time. If you work with a company, the STEM professionals of color, encouraging them through use of some of their time to mentor students or tutor in a classroom, or have students come to your facility or spaces. Building meaningful relationships and connections with our schools and our students, especially and their families, is incredibly important to building the STEM pipeline. And I want to thank you in advance for your commitment to our students. They rely on each and every one of us to lead and guide them towards a bright future. And I appreciate your time. And I'll send it back to you, Lori.
Thank you so much, Brenda. I have so many questions for you, and we've got questions pouring in. So we want to, but first let's go to Joe and then Christina and Ying, because the flow is wonderful. You've laid out some of the challenges and some of the things the school system's looking at. And Joe's going to talk about some specifics of what the business community can do and is doing. And then we'll hear from Christina and Ying about what those sorts of experiences actually meant to them in their pipeline. So I'm dying to ask you a question. I'm going to hold on and introduce Joe from United Way, who's going to talk about this powerful public-private partnership.
Morning, everyone. I'm humbled to be here and so excited to talk to everyone and answer your questions. I'm Joe. I'm a big fan of BPS. I work very closely with you all. And I'm at the United Way. I run our BOSSTEM initiative, and focusing on STEM was a no-brainer for United Way and our corporate partners. We all know Boston's at the forefront of many STEM industries, but when you look at the demographics, as the superintendent was saying, the historical makeup of employees, they look like me. They're white, they're cis, they're male. We don't see many women, BIPOC folks, LGBTQ+, and even fewer BPS students in those roles. So aside from the blatant equity issues inherent in that, it's also just a poor economic thing to do. Studies are coming out that diversity improves innovation, not to mention how much money you're probably all pouring into recruiters who jostle each other outside the doors of universities like MIT and Harvard, while just completely ignoring the potential talent to be cultivated locally, especially for jobs that maybe don't require a degree. We also recognize how hard it is for educational institutions like BPS and STEM companies like where many of you are coming from to interact with one another in transformative ways. You all don't speak the same language in most cases, and that's not. So what does BOSSTEM actually look like in practice? I like to start with prior to the pandemic, because these were the most fun times and the best part of my job. We would primarily take kids on workplace field trips to STEM companies. We're doing about 30 to 40 of these a year, and we coordinated everything on both sides. We supported the company in planning their day, developing some sort of age-appropriate hands-on STEM activity related to their work, and then we'd even, pay for the bus and schedule it. And we would make it really hard to say no to us, in other words. We also started a program hand in hand with BPS called teacher externships. Think of these like field trips for teachers. We bring together companies in a specific industry, for example, the architecture, engineering, and construction industry. We bring teachers to a different company every day, and they kind of learn about what are the jobs, the skills, any sort of cool things that are going on in the industry that they can then bring back to their students in the classroom. It's also, we see it as sort of a Trojan horse for building social capital between STEM professionals and educators. It's typically, again, very difficult for these two groups to interact with one another. And so this is just a very human way for them to connect. Since the pandemic, we've had to do a lot of things differently and virtually. Pretty immediately, we started a weekly newsletter to all of our STEM education partners and our volunteers, just to keep everyone apprised of what's going on and the opportunities available to them. We co-led the execution of STEM Week, which is usually the third week in October, with Boston Public Schools as well as many other partners. We started recording what we call STEM chats. These are career conversations, and to date have almost 150 of these recorded. And we're in the process of organizing these to be more accessible to teachers with the help of BPS's STEM department and some teachers. We've also run monthly movie making meets where we bring on students to watch a STEM movie with us, talk to a STEM professional, and have some sort of making activity. We've been trying to also record what we call STEM Bites, which are mini STEM lessons led by STEM professionals like yourselves. If you're interested, please give me a call. It's been tough to get too many of these off the ground, but they're really fun. And we just hosted our first virtual field trip a few weeks back with a biotech class from the New Mission High School with a pharma company called Lindra, which was a surprising success as well. Over the last year, we also kept doing the teacher externships, although they were virtual. We hosted 5 of them, which explored the architecture, engineering, construction, cybersecurity, and life science industries. So I'm going to stop there so that we can hear from the folks that we all actually want to hear from, which are the students and their pathways. So I'll throw it back to you, Lori.
Thank you so much, Joe. Again, I have so many questions for you, and questions are coming in the Q&A. What I will say is that if you could, Joe, post in the chat for folks to be able to reach you at United Way. You talked about STEM professionals being involved, and how do people get connected to BOSTEM? Which for folks who aren't catching our acronyms, Boston STEM, BOSTEM is that fabulous public-private partnership. So if you share that with us all, that's great. And again, I have a question for you, but we're gonna move on to Christina. And Christina and Ying will speak about their own path to different STEM careers. First, Christina.
Hello, everyone. My name is Christina Silva, and I currently work as a researcher at TURC, a STEM education research center based in Cambridge. My journey into STEM education was not planned, as I was actually on my way to become a social worker before I started my career at TURC. Growing up, I was often in predominantly white spaces and was almost always the only student of color or Asian student in the classroom. I didn't have the language to identify what I experienced at the time, but now that I do, I reflect and realize that I experienced many microaggressions, racial discrimination, and isolation as I grew up and made my way to attending college in Boston. While at Wheelock College to get my degree in social work, I started to learn more about intersectionality and how our social identities, such as our race, ethnicity, and gender, influence our experiences and opportunities. However, I never learned how to appreciate it on a personal level because I never experienced what it was like to see another Filipino American woman, other than my mom, thrive and succeed the way that I'm able to see now as a researcher at TURC. I feel very fortunate that in my spring semester of my junior year, Dean Beatrice Adelabu, a woman of color and founding director of the Emerging Scholars Program at Wheelock, emailed me one day and said that I would be a great fit for an internship she was part of developing at TURC, known as the TURC Scholars Program. The TURC Scholars Program is an internship for undergraduate and graduate students of color and was recruiting students from Wheelock College as part of the first cohort. Beatrice's encouragement to pursue an opportunity outside of social work introduced me to the very first space where I was able to find comfort in being surrounded by women of color, who all helped me develop a sense of pride for my intersecting identities as a Filipina American woman. They also served as mentors for me as I completed my undergraduate degree and transitioned into the workforce. These individuals include scholars of color Mia Ong, Nuria Jamo Pascual, and Falashade Cromwell Solomon, with a very big thank you to Marlene Mitchell, the Turk Scholars Program Coordinator. Since being a Turk scholar, I've been able to cultivate a counterspace with these mentors, along with other women and scholars of color, Audrey Martinez Gudapacum, Lisette Torres Gerald, and Erica Cruz. You have no idea how impactful it is to see people who look like you in fields you never imagined you could be a part of. For the first time in my life, I had mentors and role models who looked like me, understood my experiences, and empowered me to pursue a different career. Upon graduating with my bachelor's of social work in 2019, I was offered a full-time staff position at Turk and have been conducting research for the last 3 years. When you're creating opportunities to provide to underserved communities, I urge you to take the time to consider the importance of mentors and the impact they have for the individuals you want participating in these opportunities. Having a mentor is important, but having a mentor who shares the same social identities as you is even more impactful. Additionally, I encourage you to be flexible in your ideology of who best fits the opportunities you want to offer. As I shared earlier, I was going to become a social worker and had no intention in conducting STEM education research. However, over the last 3 years that I've been at Turk, my research teams have provided me with opportunities to develop and refine my research skills that have contributed to 8 research projects funded by the National Science Foundation, with all 8 led by women and women of color scholars. Additionally, I've co-authored 7 publications, with 2 being listed as the first author. Even more importantly, I can proudly say that I'm a STEM education researcher whose research is grounded in achieving STEM equity and inclusion. Thank you.
Oh, Christina,
Yes.
Christina, thank you for your wisdom and for your honesty. So many questions for you. Let's hear first from Ying, and then we're going to bring all the panelists up to have a conversation amongst you. So Ying Ying Wu, who tells me she goes by Ying.
Hello everyone, my name is Ying Ying Wu. Before I start, I want to say thank you to Boston Club for giving me this opportunity to be here and share my story with you all. As Donna mentioned it, I grew up in small town in Guangdong, China. Before I moved to Boston with my family 11 years ago, I grew up in a small town in Guangdong, and it is very challenging for me to come to the United States because I knew no English, and my parents, they all know, they knew no English. And I would like to start with my journey of becoming a math teacher. Is never easy for me. And I did my students not understand anything in my school. Math was actually the only subject I could do well because I knew Arabic number before I came here. And all the math symbols are the same. However, I was very fortunate to have some best teachers in Quincy Public School who cheered me up and motivated me to keep trying my best, even though I did very poorly in school and had no friends. With the help from my teachers, I managed to pick up English fairly quickly and did better and better in upcoming years. It is not an exaggeration to say that teachers in Quincy Public School changed my life. And this is exactly the reason why I wanted to become a teacher, that I could change more students' life. I went to Wheelock and BU for an education major and went to underprivileged area like Boston Public School and Lowell Public School to be a math teacher. Interestingly, I found out that those who are not good at English are usually good at math. for exactly the same reasons that math was the only subjects they could understand. And I shared my story with my students who are from Africa, South America, and other emergent economies for a better life. And I told them they could achieve much higher than they could, than they thought if they work as hard as me when I was a student. Moreover, because I understood the struggles when students just came to a new environment, I always spent extra time with my students and their parents to make them feel more comfortable in school and welcoming in school. I firmly believe that math is very important in education because it lays the foundations for all STEM fields, which is a growing and a rewarding career path. Even if my students don't want to work in a STEM field, I will tell them that math will help them think in a more logical and organized way. At Turk, I worked as a student researcher during my undergrad internship, and I focused on the projects at Middle School Data Club with Andy Rubin. During the project, I learned it to challenge myself to figure out all the details behind the math problems we have and how to build relationship with students. I still remember that I learned it from Andy that I should start with my teaching by engaging topics and then connect it to my math lessons. Turk taught me how to become an effective teacher, so I'm able to help most of my students to appreciate the beauty of math. As an immigrant myself, I understand the tremendous challenge when I try to learn math in a foreign language. And because of this challenge experience, I want to help more students, not English, to appreciate the beauty of math and really enjoy learning it. I also want to help them build confidence for themselves so that in their future endeavors, they feel empowered to tackle any challenge academically or professionally. Overall, no matter what your background is, as long as you are willing to work hard and seize the opportunity with a little help, you will be successful in learning. That's it.
Thank you so much, Ying. I think I can echo the audience in saying that wouldn't we have loved to have you as our 8th grade math teacher? And what an example of what the superintendent was talking about, that every student in front of us is the potential next teacher of the next generation, or the next STEM researcher, the next engineer. So if we could bring up all 4 of our panelists now on the screen, I have questions for each of you and all of you. We've got Ying and Joe and Christina and Brenda. Let me start with Christina and Ying. Can you think of things, you've talked eloquently about what helped you along the journey to think about going into STEM. Can you think of things that could have happened even earlier on that the school system and the school system partners can be doing in terms of exposing kids to STEM in elementary and middle school?
I can go first. So I think one of the most important parts about introducing STEM to students, especially students of color, is to make sure that they see people like them in these STEM professions. Because when I was growing up, I didn't know that there were such things as like a Filipino scientist, and I didn't know that there were such things as Filipino physicists. And that to me, as someone who immigrated from the Philippines to the United States when I was a little girl and being in predominantly white spaces, I wish I'd seen that, because maybe I would have fallen in love with science more. But I think that it's important to introduce young students that there are people like them in the fields, and there are people like them who are very successful in their fields. And I just was thinking about, you know, that movie Hidden Figures, where it showed the story of Mary Jackson, the first African-American female engineer for NASA. If that came out when I was a little girl, I would have been like, yeah, I can go to NASA, I can do that. But it came out when I was a young adult and I was going into my undergrad, and it's not as impactful when you're like a young adult, because now you have your own kind of beliefs and everything. But when you're younger, you're so impressionable, and it's just important to see people like you in these fields. And I think that's very key to what you're introducing into the curriculum.
Thank you. Ying, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think it will be helpful to have students to have a deeper understanding for the STEM field career. As a teacher in Lowell Public School, I realized that my students, they don't understand how the STEM field can help their future career. I think it will be great that school can like work with some of the STEM company to provide an opportunity for the student to learn a regular day of their employees. That would be awesome.
Yeah, and so a related question for both Joe and Brenda. Sometimes it's a two-way thing where businesses need to know what the value is for them of investing in the school system through either financial investment, coming in and doing work in the classroom, having students come to them, do mentorships. What are you hearing, I would say especially Joe, from the business community, are the benefits to them to actually partner with you and with the school system?
Yeah, so it's a complicated issue. Unfortunately, I think companies tend to take a pretty short-term view in terms of hiring and retention, which is no surprise. They need workers now, right? There's a workforce problem, and that impatience and the pressure to fill those gaps narrows their view. And so they think about, okay, we're going to go to college campuses, and we hope all the hard work and educating has been done for us, and we're just going to get these folks. And you know what? Just to make sure we get folks, we'll up the perks that you get for coming to our company, unlimited snacks, free lunch, all that kind of stuff, so that we can edge out the competition. Or even worse, maybe they don't see the point in investing in the education system as a whole to increase the workforce pool, because there's no guarantee by me putting in money or time that I'm going to get qualified people that end up at my company. They might get snatched up by, someone else or the competition. That being said, I am starting to see a shift, not just to think of this as an equity issue, but as a long-term problem to be solved. Something that will likely take a generation, not a year or even 5. And I'm talking about starting as early as pre-K, the benefits of which we're not going to see for 20 plus years. It's really difficult as a human, as anyone, to think on that kind of timeline. But unless we do, we're going to keep doing the same thing over and over and over again and getting the same result. And our problems are just going to continue to multiply. One last thing I do want to mention, though, as for some hope, is leveraging getting involved with STEM education and volunteering as a company is actually a good competitive advantage in recruiting young people. We want to know that we're not just doing this job and making money, but we're having an impact that's meaningful in some way. And I would say the vast majority of the volunteers we actually work with are millennial age or in that range. And I don't think that's by any chance. Having opportunities to make change in the community is a competitive hiring advantage when done right. And I want to make that clear to folks, is like, it's not just the equity issue. It is very much a competitive advantage hiring thing as well.
Excellent. That's exactly where I think we're headed for the next couple of minutes to think about this. So again, for Joe and Brenda, if the people who are watching from small businesses, I mean, one person posted a question and said, hey, we know that GE partners with the schools. Who else in Boston is a good corporate, thinks about their company in terms of corporate responsibility? What other large companies, small companies are partnering with the schools to make a difference in terms of STEM?
Well, we have a lot of partners. I would say that the largest is probably Vertex and GE, who were partnering. GE gave us that huge big grant, and that's why I mentioned them. But many of our partners are higher ed partners as well. And all of our smaller business partners who have been with us. Joe may know more than me than who from all of the partners, as I'm new to Boston, but we're just very fortunate to have so many of them coming. I would say that I wanted to answer the question before because I was thinking about Joe's response and the employee satisfaction. I think not only is it a recruitment tool, I think it's a retention tool as well for employees. And there's a lot of studies out there that say that employees that go out and volunteer, especially with youth, because they just give you so much joy, and it's an easy proposition for workers, and it does bring back a lot of satisfaction to them and their worker satisfaction. I think also their future customers, not only future employees, and so they get introduced to your company and they get introduced to the work that you're doing, I think, which then helps them to know more about you and your products and the service that you provide to the community.
And then Joe, maybe a related question for you. If there are folks, I know there are many folks in the audience who are from mid-size or smaller businesses. Is there a role for those folks as well within BOSTEM?
Don't tell the larger companies this, but I actually prefer to work with the smaller and mid-size. It becomes incredibly difficult to work with the larger organizations because they're so huge that, you know, it's a lot easier, I guess, maybe to get sponsorship, but a lot harder to do anything that is more than a one-off in terms of volunteering with the larger companies, because there's just so much red tape and bureaucracy and people to work with. I have found a lot more success working with, I would say this, smaller companies or larger companies that have like an outpost in the greater Boston area. So for example, one of our very close corporate partners is Eli Lilly. They're based in Indianapolis, like however many thousands of employees, but they have this office that's focused on innovation in Cambridge. And it's a much smaller group of people. And we've done a lot with them over the years. So, you know, I'd say if anything, it's preferable to work with the smaller and mid-sized companies.
Great, and we'll make sure that before we wrap up today that we have you post again in the chat for everybody the way to connect to BOSTEM. So the next question we got is a really interesting one. It was for Christina and Ying, but I think it's relevant for all of you, which says that you have been so eloquent about the people who've opened doors for you, right? And held the door open for you to come through. How do you think about in your work, and I can tell both of you do, Christina and Ying, think about holding doors open for other people who come behind you? And I would say that's relevant for every one of us should be thinking about that at all times. All of us had advantages or disadvantages in our lives growing up. And I love how Michelle Obama talks about that when people open the door, it's our job to step through it and then to keep it open for people behind us. So do you have any specific thoughts, Ying, Christina, and then also I would say Brenda in particular about holding the door open for the next generation?
Sure. So I want to make a comment related to this question and circling back to what Brenda and Joe has talked about. In the research that I do with Mia Ong and Nuria Mo Pascual, we look at women of color and STEM. And right now we're looking at women of color in computing and technology. And what we found is that giving back, the act of giving back, so volunteering, mentoring, you know, going out and doing outreach with young people, it serves as a motivation to stay. And it is in the research, it serves as a motivation to persist in their fields. But what's key to this giving back is also the employer being able to see that they're giving back and they're putting this extra time outside of the work hours, and valuing it in such a way that it moves towards their own advancement in their position, right? And that what I mean by that is there's a lot of, for example, professors of color, especially in academia, who provide mentoring to their students. And it's not necessarily acknowledged that this extra work that they're doing with their students is part of their pathway to tenure and or in their own advancement or promotion. And so when I'm thinking about how I want to keep the door open for this, for the future generation, I think about the importance of mentoring and serving as a role model for the next generation of students of color, especially women of color. And I feel very lucky that in my position and with the supervisors that I work with, that they value what I do as a mentor and as a role model, and they acknowledge my work. And that's just as important when your employer sees what you're doing and acknowledges that you're giving back. And I don't think it's understood how much time is taken to do some of these giving back activities, although it is served as a persistent strategy. So I think in that way, I want to continue doing that. And I also want to raise awareness that employers should value it as much as the employee does, because it does help in the long run.
Absolutely. A lot more companies are thinking about, that whole phrase, what gets measured gets done, is building it into a concrete part of people's performance and evaluation, that all of us are giving back in that way and that that's recognized. Ying or Brenda?
Yeah, so I guess one of my favorite, I'll build off of what Christina said, one of my favorite definitions of leadership is from Stephen Covey, where he says, that you speak to someone their worth and potential so clearly that they come to believe it themselves. And, I think back to my own experience as a young girl growing up in the projects, having that Head Start experience I spoke about when I gave my speak at the very beginning. And then so that was the front end of my bookend of my experience as a Head Start child. But then after going to 7 different schools, I get in shift in my senior year and I get Mr. Joseph. And he is my anatomy and biology teacher. And he gives it so that you can take it as a college credit, you can take it as an honors credit, or you can just take it for regular credit. And of course, I'm going, well, I'll just take it to regular credit because I'm a senior, on senior slide. And he inspires me to take it for college credit. Then he tells me to apply to this private college for medical school because he thinks, because my interest is so much into learning, he thinks that I should become a medical doctor. So he helps me get a full ride scholarship to a private college in Minnesota. And so I, to a STEM field. And I didn't stay in that long because I knew I wanted to be a teacher, but still having folks like that to speak into you and has really stayed with me through my career. And I think that that's the one thing that employers and employees and community partners and folks like Joe and all of you on this call can do is just stand in the gap and breathe into each child their worth and their potential until they come to see it in themselves.
That's great. Go ahead, Ying.
As a teacher,
I can tell you have something to say.
yes, as a teacher, I will share my story with my students and let them know they can be anyone if they respect everyone, work hard, and be humble. The more important part is believing your students and helping them to develop their confidence in something they are passionate about. I will show my students that I, as their teacher, believe they can be successful in the future.
Yeah, that is definitely a theme from today, right? The role modeling, the having people who look like us. So I have 2 questions that came in for the superintendent. One big one. Ready for the big one, right?
Too early for hard questions.
Yeah, it's the scope of the challenge. So you and Joe have talked about specific programs, specific initiatives. An earlier question came in, which is, tell us the scope of the challenge. Where are we and where do we want to be in terms of having a system that really has built in STEM education, STEM opportunities? And then someone posted in the chat here, what does success look like? That's often one of the best questions. What will it look like if the school system has the kinds of partnerships it needs to? You talked about communication, you talked about the teacher pipeline. Can you and Joe both articulate where are we as a system? And just to throw even more at you, somebody else posted the question, how do we hold up compared to other urban public school systems in the country? So basically, where are we with our STEM vision and execution?
So from my perspective, I'm new here to Boston. So I got here in 2019 and then was, the first 6 months going in schools and looking and assessing with my own eyes the condition of our facilities and our buildings and opportunities for STEM. And then we hired Elizabeth Muletsky Kenny, who is outstanding educator and leader within our academic office, who has been really innovative. So we've been trying to identify where are the bright stars out within the Boston Public School Teacher Corps and capturing their ideas. And, this BEES program was a huge piece. Securing the GE funding to do some of the elementary science was a huge piece. Continuing with other partners and UMass Boston on some of the other pieces that we're doing in Tufts and MIT and some of the other pieces are really important. But I think that in terms of our comparison, having come from Minnesota, I feel like we're a little behind in our overall STEM education, especially at the elementary level. So there's, this is why I wanted us to do a greater focus on elementary science. And, we have amazing teachers doing this work, but we have to build in a system for our professional development, which we are doing now. So I would say we're still in the beginning stages of really expanding that out, but the opportunity is right in front of us. We have $400 million coming to the Boston Public Schools over the next 3 years in which to beef up our programs and make them more equitable and accessible to schools across all of Boston Public Schools. And so I think that's the biggest piece, is creating that academic vision, the plan for it, and then the professional development to our teachers so that they have what they need, and then standing up science laboratories for our upper grades and maker spaces for our lower grades, and working on some of that facilities and being sure that our teachers have what they need to be able to succeed in the classroom.
Okay. Joe, do you want to add anything to the scope of the challenge and where we are as a city?
I agree with the superintendent. We're in the infant stages, as I was saying before. This is a generational problem that we're trying to solve, and we're very much in the beginning stages. I like, SNAP for Beth Malusky, who Brenda mentioned. She's been an absolute star, an amazing partner to work with. If you have an idea, she'll help you get it done and figure it out. So we have, I feel like, the right people starting to come into place and some of the right infrastructure to start building upon, but we are definitely in the beginning stages. And to that point, there's, I think, a lot of distrust throughout the district on both sides, just because there have been so many shifts. There have been so many relationships that we were excited for and didn't end out the way we wanted to. There's been abandonment. It's really tough. So like, we're sort of more in that, like, can we like stop for a minute and build a relationship and get to know each other and figure out what each other needs so we can start to build something that is longer lasting. So we're not there yet. Again, my foothold is sort of more in the out of school time space. And I can't like speak highly enough of our out of school time partners. We are very data heavy, much to some of their chagrin. I mean, we all know kids don't want to be filling out surveys. But we track things like change in STEM aspirations over the course of a program, career knowledge. We look at a third-party observer to see what is the quality of the programming. We look at social emotional information. And prior to the pandemic, we were looking at MCAS data, which is, I would honestly say, lower on our list of import, especially in terms of out of school time. But we're looking at all this data to figure out, like, where are those gaps? Where are those areas of improvement? And a lot of what we do in collaboration with an organization called Boston After School and Beyond is provide professional development and coaching to these after school and summer programs, again, to bring up that quality, which we know will impact student outcomes. My dream, which I was trying to do before the pandemic, but we all know how that caused everyone's dream to take a suspension, was to create sort of like these STEM regions within the district. I was thinking particularly around the Grove Hall area, of where you would kind of have, at least to pilot, this group of schools who are like, okay, for the next 5-10 years, we're going full STEM. And what we could then do, if we had that commitment on the school level, is find some companies to then commit to those schools year after year and build out a longer term, year-long plan to engage on both sides. So I'm hoping to eventually get back to that. But this kind of idea of, like, in order to build the capacity, you need to build the relationships, and those relationships need to be there and be committed for a long time to start to see these changes and even start to build out those outcomes. I mean, I think at the end of the day, the two major outcomes we're probably looking for are BPS students getting into STEM jobs, and are they being retained by those jobs because they're satisfied working in those areas and they feel like they are part of that company culture. So I think those are kind of the ways we're thinking about it. But again, like Brenda said, like, we are in, we're in pre-K right now. in terms of like where we're at in terms of doing this work. But I hope that doesn't deter anyone on the call, because again, you got to be in this for the long run if you want to see change.
That makes so much sense. And speaking of the long run, a question came in for Ying or Christina or both about where do you see yourselves going next now that you're in a STEM career? I see you running the Boston Club, running the city, running segments of the country, but where do you see yourselves?
I can go first. What do I want to be when I grow up? I ask myself that all the time. So right now I feel very happy with my position at Turk. I want to continue growing at Turk. I'm right now I'm a research development. My formal title is Research Development Specialist 1, and so I'd love to grow and advance myself as a researcher through Turk. And my ultimate goal is to get my master's and my PhD. And in conversations with the woman who got me into Turk in the first place, Beatrice Adelabu, she's told me, I envision you being a professor. So, so that's kind of on my mind too, because I do know that there's not as many Southeast Asian American professors in academia right now, especially Filipino American professors. And so that's where I'm at right now. I'd love to stay at Turk. I absolutely love working with the women of color that I work with. And I really believe that that's my home base. But, as I continue growing up, we'll see. But I definitely want to stay in research and continue the research I do on women of color in STEM professions and education.
Great. And Ying?
I think I want to help more students and take more responsibility in my school. And I want to start my PhD in 5 years. I want to impact more people because I see myself as a classroom teacher because I only teach 3 classes for a day, but I want to help more students because being a teacher, you only can help like 3 classes students. I want to be a leader to impact my colleague and help more students.
Oh, future principal.
It's the pipeline.
That's right. I'm always looking. You'll have to shoot me an email, Ying.
I will.
We will connect you all, absolutely. So
can I say, Lori, one
please.
of the questions was, what does success look like? I think it's where you see the joy in Ying and Christina here, in their face, that children love science, that they are creators, and that you have elementary through grade 12 pathways that are very clearly articulated, that kids can see those opportunities in every single school, that there's multiple ways for them to engage, whether it's coding with the new technology that we have and new software programs, or whether it's working in the freight farm outside, or a temporary science lab, or a trip to the museum. Just a number of ways that I think that we're enriching children's lives with science.
So here's an interesting question that came in for you, Brenda. It's difficult to talk about the phrase silver linings with a pandemic, given how devastating the pandemic has been. And yet it's interesting, many companies and organizations are saying, hey, we're realizing that some of the things we've done to pivot during the pandemic are things that maybe we could have done before, that we should be carrying forward. So can you think of 1 or 2 things, or share with us 1 or 2 things that the school system has done to pivot that you have seen to actually improve the quality of education and then close the opportunity gap that you're going to continue into the future?
Well, first, I think it's our belief systems. One of the things is that I think everyone's like, I don't know how we're going to do it, but we did. And so I think we'll look back on this year and figure out how more nimble and resilient we are. And that certainly it's not about resources. I mean, we were able to get 20,000 computers in the hands of kids within a couple weeks. We were able to pivot and feed children now 6 million meals and multiple different delivery models. This pivot to complete new way of doing education and remote education. So the teachers have been absolutely amazing, pivoting and learning and growing and creating with one another. I think that is an actual silver lining. So I think we're stronger because of that. Also, the way that we're using technology more as a tool now within the classroom, and so they have greater access to tools. And one of the other real silver linings is the strong focus, and this maybe wasn't to the first pandemic, but the second pandemic of racial strife in the country, and being able to capitalize on that to really talk about racism within our policies and within our curriculum, and look at ways that we could be more anti-racist and more ways to be more inclusive for students, and to make sure our curriculum is reflective of the students we serve or our workforce, and having more resolve toward that. And then finally, I would say the way that we've been able to engage with families. And we are so thankful to our families for helping us this past year. We always say a parent is a child's first teacher. Well, this year they really were the child's first teacher. And so we found new ways to connect with them through the use of technology, which has been great.
Okay. So we'll close with 3 questions on 3 different levels. One is a systems question, a policy question, and then a very individual question. The system question that came in, I think, is for Joe, which is, even though you talk about us being the pre-K stage, there are many public school systems that actually have barely begun to touch building in STEM and STEAM and building these kinds of partnerships. Somebody asked, do you have any recommendation for school systems that are just starting out with the kind of thing that BOSTEM's doing?
So I would say, obviously, you can, reach out to me, or, probably not Brenda directly, but Beth in the STEM department, who are the folks focusing on this, and we can help direct you for sure. I will say right now, and please, Brenda, correct me if I'm wrong, there's not much you can do directly in this moment as we're coming out of COVID. Everyone has their hands full right now. We're just trying to finish up the year. We're getting ready for summer. The best thing you can do is be patient and start to build a relationship for next school year. Teachers and kids are burned out. They're just trying to get through this nightmare of a year. I know you all want to make an impact right now in this time of crisis, but like I said, this is a problem with no quick solution. That means advocating with your leadership in HR department to commit to this issue for the long run, and advocating for internal policy changes to require things like volunteering and investing in the community. So again, you can work with me, the STEM department at BPS, an individual school, a nonprofit. I don't care. I'll connect you to whoever you want to work with. But it is a long-term thing, and you need to plan for a long-term engagement and an investment strategy of time and money. That way, when next school year starts, you'll be ready to hit the ground running, and you'll have built that trust. Instead of, once school starts, it's like very hard to get in there and do something because there's momentum that's carrying everyone forward. And it's going to be particularly tough next year as everyone's trying to sort of play catch up, getting used to being in person again, hopefully, and all these other issues that they're going to be dealing with. So, again, we will play connector for you, but don't expect to have direct connection right away, and please be patient. We're going to get there.
And you mentioned resources a couple of sentences ago. One question came in that this is the more policy question. Are there things we should be aware of that are, pending either on the state or federal level in terms of funding that will help with the work that you're doing? Someone specifically asked about the federal funding that Biden is pushing for. Will that help with some of these equity issues?
Definitely a Brenda question.
Yeah. Well, we have a commission that's going to start meeting on Thursday, and we'll be meeting with all of our families and community as we drive our strategic plan. But certainly this is one of those pieces, is to be able to have equitable opportunities across all our schools. So I think that, yes, indeed, it will help. As it can help us stand up, science labs. It can help us stand up, all of the tools and equipment that are needed for science education, for instance. So there's a lot of, one-time costs that we can do to help improve opportunity across our schools.
And then on the more individual level, as we close out, before I turn it over to Donna, each of you, there's one thing you want the audience to take away, one thing you want them to know, one thing you want them to do. What's your takeaway from today, each of you? Why don't we start with Christina?
greatest takeaway from today's conversation? Oh, there's so many big important highlights that came up, but for me, this is said in so many spaces, especially with the current kind of polarization regarding issues around race and equity in the United States, is representation matters. You know, when I see someone like me in a STEM profession or a STEM field, I feel like that STEM field and that STEM career resonate with me more. So when you're going into a classroom and creating that curriculum, make sure that what you're teaching is culturally responsive to your students. When you're hiring someone, you know, don't just hire someone and have them serve as a token in your community, in your organization. You, be true to the mission of diversity and inclusion for your company. And when you're doing things like giving back and, you know, putting faces to the position, and, you know, that just so happens that these faces you're sending out are mostly people of color, make sure that you're valuing their efforts of giving back and make sure that it's acknowledged. So representation matters in so many ways, from K through 12 all the way to the workforce, and value that representation.
Great, thank you. And Ying.
The thing I take away is I think building relationship matters, but helping students fall in love with math is more important to help them to solve the math problems or pass their math class.
Falling in love with math. Joe, what's your takeaway?
Relationships are built on a foundation of trust, and trust is earned, not given. So again, like I keep saying, you need to commit long-term. You need to take those small steps in the beginning to build that relationship and that trust. And the dividends are not going to start paying out for years. There will be immediate dividends, like Brenda said, like working with kids is just fun. It's like the best part of doing anything. But in terms of seeing outcomes, it's going to take a really long time. And so be patient and keep it up. And like Ying Ying said, you know, inspire. You know, you have fun doing your work. You got to let kids see that too.
And Brenda, what is your takeaway for us?
Oh, just seeing Christina and Ying give me great joy and promise. And when you see these two beautiful young women who are in STEM fields, you know, it just gives me all the hope in the world that we're on the right trajectory, doing the right work.
And my closing comment, I'm going to turn it over to Donna, is to say to folks who are listening in the audience who may be new to the Boston Club, this is an example of the kind of program that we do. And I only joined the club last fall. So if you were thinking about joining the club, I have to say it is the most welcoming, and I'm trying to think of what the other word is, brilliant, dynamic, compassionate, powerful group of women in Greater Boston. And so I'm sure Donna, as she closes, will let us know if you're interested in joining, how you can join us. Thank you.
Thank you, Lauren. And wow, I'd like to extend my gratitude and thanks to all the speakers today. A big virtual round of applause. Wow, you have certainly